Well, hello, everybody. My name is Carmen Cruz. I use she, her pronouns. I am located close to Dallas, Texas, and Denton, Texas. That's where I'm coming from today and where I've worked most of my life. I'm originally from Miami, Florida, a Cuban American child of immigrants who came over during Castro's regime and the big exodus from Cuba. So I've grown up in a bicultural way, having been born in the United States. So just to know something about me personally in terms of some of the topics we're talking about today, having the lived experience of living a bicultural life, and can speak to some of those experiences for people, hopefully today. In terms of my education, I have a doctoral degree in clinical psychology, and I've been a psychologist in various communities, worked in different universities. I spent 26 years at Texas Women's University, which was teaching and doing therapy, and it was really wonderful. And now I work at a medical center. And I have worked with a lot of Latinx community members and families throughout the years. And so I'm just really happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Dr. Cruz. And I'll defer over to Dr. Inclan to introduce himself.
Good morning to all. My name is Jaime Inclan. I'm an immigrant from Puerto Rico. Notice that I said immigrant and not migrant. I did my university studies and graduate studies in the United States, where I lived then in New York with my family since the age of the dinosaurs. In 1980, I'm the founder and director of the Roberto Clemente Center, which we founded here in the Lower East Side of Manhattan in 1980. We founded a community-based clinic. At that time, that was not such a popular phenomena. Demanded that all the staff, or required that all the staff would be bilingual, bicultural in Spanish. Not a popular item then, not a specialty item as it is today. It was then. Now. So we had to go through the things that we went at that time to be accused of reverse discrimination and so on and so forth. But we figured that if mental health services were being provided, the vehicle for that was the person or the therapist, the conversation, et cetera, and understanding was the focus and the idea. So since then, we have been working with the families that are urban poor, immigrant families from the Lower East Side of Manhattan and all boroughs of Manhattan. And we have been training other professionals in mental health, social workers, psychologists, and so on, to work from a systemic standpoint. And we have developed some models of working ecosystemically with families and with individuals, of course. So we are here as service providers, and our experience then over the years obviously have been with multiple waves of immigrants that change over time, and maybe and I will discuss that at some point. So that's my experience with Latin American, primarily Caribbean and Latin American immigrants, and so that's what we've worked with. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Thank you both for sharing a little bit about yourselves. One thing I like that you guys mentioned is the actual location that you guys are located. And that is the focus of what we're talking about is mental health, and how, despite how far we are from each other, how similar the situations we are to each other. So just to give a little perspective on how we're going to run today's event. It's I have 5 questions that I'm going to ask the speakers. I'm hoping to get through all 5 questions for each speaker. If we don't have the time to go through the 5 questions, I will email their response to the group after the event is over with a caption and a copy of this event video. Now, while each speaker does present and answers one question, I'm going to allow for just one individual in the audience to ask a question back and let the speaker respond to that question. If you do have any other questions pertaining to how the speaker responds, feel free to put them into the chat. If we have time at the end, we'll go over through the questions in the chat. Please indicate if you do have a specific question for a specific speaker. Indicate this, the question along with the speaker that you want feedback from. Again, at the end, if we have time, we'll go through those questions. If not, I'll defer those questions out to the speakers, and in a later time, I'll go ahead and send the response out to you guys. And we'll start because I had Dr. Cruz introduce herself first. I'll facilitate the first question to Dr. Hyman. So, Dr. Hyman, how do you think legal challenges such as immigration status or fear of deportations are affecting the mental health in immigrant or Latino communities, and what impact does this have on accessing care?
Okay, I mean, the first thing I want to say about this is that to start with, immigration itself affects the mental health of the person. Any and all persons, regardless of particular conditions of certain groups. Immigration, the process of immigration is characterized by insecurity, facing the unknown, challenges, fear of failure, and anxiety. We have a cohort of students here now that they come from Puerto Rico and other places to train in psychology. They're going through the process. They have supports, they have families in Puerto Rico, and so on and so forth. Because we are all like, I call it like little plants and animals. And repotting a plant or transplanting a person from one soil to another has consequences. It is you would expect that if you it's not that easy to transplant a coquí from Puerto Rico to other places of the world. They seem to not do well elsewhere. Others take a little time to adjust. Is not uncommon for leaves to wilt and before they are reborn, and so on and so forth. So another way of saying that is something that we know in the field also from addictions and psychology, people, places, and things. Change involves sometimes, as if people in the addiction field say, changing people, places, and things. Who you connect to, things that you do, and places that you go. That applies to an immigrant. It's a change in all of those. And I mentioned that particular example because we all know how difficult it is to make that change personally of people, places, and things. Now, additional risk factors exist that exacerbate Latin American immigrants, their material conditions, their life conditions, and their emotional health. And that's on top of being immigrants. Immigrant status, of course, is a source of security. Inevitably and without doubt. We all have been in a group meeting or other that you feel out of sorts, that you feel that this is not my clan, this is not my group, this is not, I don't fit here. Whether it's a professional group, whether it's a family group, that is the experience of, or approximates the experience of not having legal papers or immigration papers that allow you to feel the tranquility that one has. I know as an immigrant that I had when I moved here in New York, that I was like many other persons before coming to the Lower East Side, looking at real estate and this and that and the other. And 30 years later, I tell myself, I know that if this decision I was making in Puerto Rico to have invested in some things at the time, it would have been done without thinking, that it was obvious. Not that I would have monetary support, but I would have a security of what I was doing that you do not have, and takes time to accept, to get there. Let me rush a little bit because I know that time here is limited. Something has to do also with the acceptance, how inviting or accepting, validating is the environment that you migrate to. And we have political candidates exhibiting various alternative positions on that, and how can you feel when you understand that out there are ideas and sentiments about the immigrants, let's say, resources that people have or not, money to be able to maneuver, housing to be able to sleep and have the security of a roof, language, education, having a work contract. Some people don't move until they have a work contract.
Let me jump in and ask, and I appreciate your answer. And I did see briefly a comment that came into the chat. En la área donde tú estás, en Nueva York, how has the access to care or mental health care been? Has it been? Do you feel if it's been difficult for either anyone with a Latino background or someone who classified themselves to be an immigrant for those resources to be accessible or not?
Where there's let's understand what that's about. You think about what something that we all know is kind of, let's say, Maslow's pyramid of needs. Okay, basic needs. Then there are other needs and so on, and that go on to self-fulfillment and so on and so forth. And let me start with an example, not of immigrants, but relevant to the question, and apropos the immigrants. When the World Trade Center towers fell here in New York, we immediately kind of mobilized and tried to get ready to provide services for people that would be affected in the community and so on and so forth. We opened the doors and so on and so forth. Nobody came for months. When the need at that time was not the mental health, people were identifying family, securing places, determining life situations and conditions. They will come, but they will not come at the very beginning of the process. For persons that don't have housing, that don't have money, that don't have the security of paper, that have that when they are housed, they're housing for 2 months, at least here in New York, and then after 2 months, they have to leave the place, the shelter, and then reapply again. Uh, the, the immediate need for most persons is in a different direction, and so they try to. So there is the persons who will come in immediately will be persons with acute trauma, but persons with post-traumatic trauma will come in later. Okay, and that's something to keep in mind, because the first I know that everybody's trying out there and suggest to all the immigrants that they benefit from services, need services. We have them here to provide, but you have to work where your patient is at and what are their immediate needs. And some of them have children, they need to go to school, they're not doing well. Health, physical health is going to be primary to mental health, and so on and so forth. So there are resources out there, but the access is is limited, of course, for all the reasons that we know of language and community-based services and places that are friendly and supportive. We see a lot of immigrants because we have a place that is set up for them. Anybody who comes here finds their flag in a poster that has all the flags after this. Everybody speaks Spanish and so on and so forth. But that's not everywhere. I understand that. Anyways,
Why not? And I have a lot more questions that I want to ask you, but just for the time, for the purposes of time, I'm going to move on to Dr. Cruz too. I'm going to ask almost the same question, and I appreciate the how geographically where we are, where one is in New York, we're in Pennsylvania, and Dr. Cruz is out in Texas. So we're seeing a big perspective of how everything is, the views on every side. So for Dr. Cruz, how do legal and social challenges affect the mental health for individuals in your community, and how does that impact their ability to access mental health care?
Okay, great. And I think Dr. Inclan did a great job of like giving a very like all the very specific things under the big umbrella of barriers and things that people have to deal with in terms of language and acceptance and things like that. I think what I would add here is some about how those layers of systems and then also just self and other development impact people's mind, heart, spirit, soul, right? Like our whole selves. And to his point, but I feel like I want to highlight a couple of things related to how in a lot of surveys, Latinx immigrants really strongly report higher rates of anxiety, higher rates of depression compared to general US population. And a lot of that is because of the legal fears of deportation, or even if there's in mixed families of deportation, right? Like some have more legal status than others, and that can create some inner tensions as well. And that children also involved listening to the anxiety of the parents are also impacted, right? So that makes sense when we think about it in that way. So social challenges specifically to in terms of how does discrimination and racism and classism, I suppose we could add so many things right into all the isms. How do they affect a person? So for a long time, I think in our studies of psychology of mental health, many people before our time didn't really look at the problems of humanity sometimes and the issues we have as human beings related to our identity. And what we know is, well, a lot of us knew because we lived experiences that were very different than to the typical person, right? But I think it depends where you immigrate to. Like in terms of immigration, where do you land, right? Because if you land in New York City versus in Idaho, you're going to have two very different experiences. So representing Texas and having lived in Florida most of my life, and then and him being obviously in New York City, which is in many ways a lot more resources, right? So when you think of resources, when you look at a map and you see all the lights and all the big cities all over the US, more access is going to be available there. Like that's just a given in terms of more people, more resources, more potentially bilingual, providers. And so I do think that location is a huge part of that, of what a person's experience. Like for me, just even thinking myself as a Cuban American being raised in Miami, a bunch of all the other kids were Cuban Americans, or Puerto Rican Americans or Dominican Americans, like with the parents who had come over, right? But I have a very close friend, una prima, that grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And she had a very different experience. There were no other Cuban American kids. There were no other little Mexican American kids that, very, very few. So she was in a minority, right? So I feel like those sort of legal and social challenges so depend on region and identity, even within. And I can talk about that a little bit more. I have some other things I can later say related to identities, if you'd like. But that would be in the service of time. If you
Perfect.
want
Yeah,
to,
no, and I appreciate that you say that because where again, Pennsylvania is again in the middle of both you guys, and the comment that you made that where you go does allow for you to either get or be able to access a lot of resources. You know, Pennsylvania is not as friendly with immigrant documentation as Delaware, Maryland, Jersey, and even New York, where you can actually have your documentations from your home country, establish a certain amount of time here, and be able to transition to get your driver's license and so forth. Where some states are more friendlier than others. So I do appreciate that you mentioned that it does help or it does factor where you actually relocate to. Where it's are you going to advance faster than others? Can you get to the next step? Can you access those resources? So thank you for that. So to the next question, and I'll start with Dr. Cruz. In your views, how does social isolation or discriminations contribute to mental health struggles in your community, and what support systems are most urgent in your community?
Okay, sure. And I can build on what I had just offered. Yeah, definitely.
Sure.
And even going back to the region thing, depending what school you go to and where, in Texas right now, sort of diversity work on college campuses is illegal. Like we've had hundreds of people fired where you go to like, a state right next door, and then all those sort of minority specific services and offices are still open. We are not allowed to have LGBTQ plus centers, Latino centers, like you can have it in studies, right? So in Florida, there was a university that just knocked down 22 gender and ethnicity courses. So where you are is paramount, especially given the cultural climate in America, related to the amount of discrimination that is being allowed. So in terms of how discrimination contributes to mental health struggles is significant in my view. Basically, I mean, even just a quick survey that I found by NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Health, found that 86% of Latinx adults view mental health issues as a significant concern. Yet many do not seek service because of fear of discrimination, being misunderstood, social judgment. And within families, we have that, right? I think that in the Latino community, we have worked really, really hard to decrease stigma about seeking help. Just seeking help, especially because I think at least my experiences and many other Latin American people is like, there would be like, no, eso para la gente loca, like, no, those are for like, no, those are for the crazy people. Like you hear all these messages. So like, if then you're struggling and you're like, oh gosh, my grandmother's going to be mad, or somebody, and you hear comments sometimes in the household where it's like, no, we keep everything here in the family. We'll figure it out. We had a hard life. Come on. You're going to say you're sad. Look at everything we've given you. And we're here in this country. So the bicultural social stressors, I think, within families are something that we don't talk enough about, that I feel like families, like that could be the next frontier, is how do we help our families and our units and couples create a higher sense of like emotional intelligence to be able to cope with some of these things and to understand how these differences affect us even within families, not just our differences with everybody else. Does that make sense? Like,
It
okay.
does. Thank you for that. Yeah, and I'm appreciative of how you bring up the stigma in la cultura latina. And I know that it's not only in la cultura latina where there is
It's
that, hey, you're a
everywhere.
man up, get through it, and the whole being able to talk to a professional in the field is looked down upon. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Dr. Hyman, and that falls into now the next one here. And for the sake of time, I'm going to kind of go jump around some of the questions, but I do appreciate what you brought in what you shared, which falls in line to the next question to Dr. Hyman. What are the social and or mental health consequences and or possible discriminations against immigrants or la cultura latina, and how do you feel local organizations or professionals are responding to these challenges?
Well, the put it this way for the sake of the audience. The uh, there are stages of the immigration process. Okay, uh, uh, the, the the first stage of immigrants that when they come is very different from persons who have been here in second generation and so on, and third generation. Uh, the 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 immigrants as a group that come here are taught in their countries of origin about immigration, and and uh, they they understand that there will be discrimination and that they will be subjected to uh, uh, abuse and overwork and underpay, and they and but they come armed with a proyecto de vida, with a purpose that is to settle here for themselves, for their families, and so on and so forth. And so they come and they're trained to have a tough skin, and they are abused for that. They are abused by that, but they hunker down and they go on. Some providers try to immediately put in uh, well, it's important to take vacations. You should take vacations to rest. They're not resting. Uh, some will say, well, that seems to me to be discrimination in the workplace. I think you should bring up a suit or do something about it. They're not necessarily going to do that, and so on and so forth. So that and we have to understand that they more than our services, they take care of themselves as a group. They establish communities, barrios, zones that are protected zones of alike persons from their countries of origin, no matter what it is. For the back then, the Germans, Germantown, the Chinese Chinatown here. For us, we have El Barrio. Others will in Queens, Asia. Those are protected zones that they start. The the, our group, the Puerto Ricans, that were the first ones to come here after, because we were the first ones. Uh, anyway, we were the first ones to come here. Had to do the same. They made movies about that, West Side Story about, and all these groups, the Italians, the same thing. they protect, they start as groups that are protecting a perimeter of safety for their group. This is sometimes misunderstood by professionals, politicians, the importance of that. That is an environment of security, of stability, from where to launch. So that is that's where they sort of take care of themselves. Their self-care is in those groups. And the same thing for immigrants now that come from different places. Some go to some food shelters, some go to the others, kind of by nationality, and they and they are and they trade experiences. Listen, down here, they're giving this and that. Over there, this is happening. Don't go here. Don't go there. So the first awareness and system to support is their community groups, and see what they need and help them, because that is what it comes from. This first group of this first stage there's a tremendous paradox here, because the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean give the United States their best people. Immigrants are ambassadors of their families. They are sent here for a very important, the most important sometimes mission of their lives. So it is the and they're easier to work with from a therapeutic standpoint, because they have family values. They understand education. They want education. They understand families. They work in families. They promote good manners, and they do that. And these are kind of free injections of culture and values that is provided to the United States over the generations by immigrants that come, and and is needless to say underappreciated, shall we say.
And I appreciate everything you share there. And one of the things that um, I wanna emphasize, and si tú eres Latino, you'll understand this, that en la cultura latina there is that cultural norms where you do try to instill those into your kids. Is bendición mami, bendición papi, pidiendo esa bendición just to get ahead. Pero también you got that cultural norm in la cultura latina where you have to work hard. You got to be disciplined, and not until I'm 47 now, and I didn't know what a staycation was till like a couple years ago. Where what is a staycation? It's like, oh, you got to understand it. You got to take time for yourself. And if you don't take time for yourself, not only can you not have that, hey, let me empty the bottle so I can take in stuff. How do you help the next person if you don't help yourself? So I do appreciate you factoring those cultural norms, not only in la cultura latina, but hey, if you're relocating to a new section, you have to adapt to some of those norms that they have there without compromising who you are. So thank you for that.
We are the feeders of the values that they purport to have.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah. Dr. Cruz, I'll now move on to the next question.
Yeah.
How have the legal and social pressures in your community impacted the overall mental well-being, and what challenges do you believe are necessary to improve the mental health support?
What challenges? What? Can you repeat it one more time?
Yep. How have the legal and social pressures in your community impacted the overall mental well-being, and what challenges do you believe are necessary to improve the mental health support?
Yeah. Well, a lot of it feels like some of what what Dr. Inclan has shared is about, creating centers like his would be optimal, right? If we could have a center like his, in different spots in every state, that would be really wonderful, right? So, but there are so many other systemic barriers that we have to think about, what are things that we can change? So I mentioned something earlier, like what is the power that we have within us? Given all the positive attributes that, immigrant families come with, right? This hardworking, open to experience, clearly, whatever it may be, optimistic, courageous, I would say, like a lot of courage to do what immigrants do, right? And then to know also that depending who you are, because this is like a really hard thing for me to say and talk about, but within all of our, dozens of Latin American cultures and identities, there's also a lot of within group differences and potentially even discrimination that happens because of colorism. So for those of you who may not understand what colorism is, basically it's like a part of racism that is related to sort of your skin tone and how much skin tone privilege one might have. Like, so I'll use myself again as an example, as a person who identifies as a Cuban American woman with skin tone privilege, right? Because people will be like, oh, una hermana, you're a woman of color. It's like, okay, yeah, I am a non-white person. I'm a non-white American person. And I also have a lot more privilege when I am in environments where people are like, are you Italian? Are you Arab? Like, I know you're not white, but what are you? Like, you're not one of us kind of thing, right? So I feel like all of these things that we don't even talk about or think about are so potent in how people develop. So I'm just really with my psychologist brain thinking about how a person develops within all of these different systems, because we're in like our little system in the house, and then in our neighborhood, and then in the city, and then the state, and then continued. And to, Dr. Inclan's point earlier about, different leaders saying different things about the value of people, it's life-changing. That is so incredibly damaging to the psyche and the spirit, in my view. And then those communities, like the enclaves he talked about, those are the saving places, right? And so for me, a lot of the concerns that I have, when I think about things, is again, having been from three of the biggest states, New Jersey, New York, Texas, and Florida, where there's a lot of Latinos, right, in terms of numbers wise, and seeing the disparate resources depending where you are. And I know I said that before, so I don't want to like belabor the point, but those are the improved changes we need. More bilingual providers, and more bilingual providers that are culturally competent, right? So cultural competence is a whole other thing that if we could teach that to people who are in positions with power and authority first, that would be great, right? Like the people that have power and privilege in our culture to shift things and move things are the ones that really need this level of cultural competence, right? So that it will trickle down to all the people. So that for me is a big part of that.
And both of you guys bring excellent points. And what I like and dislike about what's going on is that you guys are making me want to go down a rabbit hole. But we're going to be here for like 6 hours just talking about a lot of things.
Yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned, Dr. Cruz, is the discrimination amongst just your skin. There are black, brown, skinned individuals in la cultura puertorriqueña, dominicana, Haitians. So
Right.
we ourselves discriminate against ourselves, and then factoring in everyone else trying to. And it's just a crazy thing to look at. But again, don't want to go down a rabbit hole,
Right.
that'll take us everywhere. And again, for sake of time, the next question I'll defer to Jaime. How are mental health services in your community addressing the intersection of legal concerns, such as possibly undocumented individuals or la cultura latina, and psychological stressors? What are the gaps that do you believe that still exist?
Mhm. Well, some of the gaps are kind of exosystemic. The first thing that the immigrants need is clearly housing, work, work, work. So we have an advocate role and a partner role within communities to support that, because people need ability. They're willing, they're able, they're capable. They need a roof. They need we and there are then legal complexities, of different nature. Persons who have suffered abuse in their country of origin can receive some kind of services. Unfortunately, people who are abused on the journey here, which we haven't talked about the journey here, which that is another trauma experience of unto itself, if it's by land and now by the Darien and so on and so forth. But we have within the Health and Hospitals Corporation in New York a legal group that is being contracted that can help consult with immigrants. Obviously, that is done. That is not enough. They're pro bono people lawyers that we know in the community that can also help. Is not enough. They really need what they appreciate a lot of guidance through the system, because the system is confusing. People are located not necessarily in where there is a home, a house, but it might be, if it's a Latino family, it'd be good that they could be located here in the Lower East Side, and they could access services and supports in the community. But the shelter might be in Harlem, or it might be in some other place, and so they'll get located where they get located. if they're So better coordination of where to locate. In our district, there are several schools. So families with children, it would be wise if they were located in whatever housing units they have that are in this community, which will have both access to it. But that doesn't necessarily happen like that. They call us Health and Hospital. It's a huge system. They call a central number, or they access that and they locate. You know what I mean? It's like they think it's theater tickets or something. This is available. Take it. So that is that's what I can say of what of needs. That again, it starts but some of them have acute problems, or acute trauma problems, acute health problems. They have to be taken care of immediately, and they usually try to get help, but not necessarily to persons that would be understanding. I was just told this morning of a case in one of these big housing units that has about 2,000 people, 3,000 people, that somebody was in a tent and complaining that they were not feeling well, that there's something going on, no, that's psychological, this and that, the other. Come back there next day, 39-year-old person dead. They went to the doctor. The doctor said that, whatever, take 2 aspirins and go home or something. That happens. Not to say what can happen and happens in a floor that is housing 500 people, bed one next to the other, with officers coming at night with flashlights to quote unquote secure safety, but they're not safe environments.
And you touch on a lot of factors that that you've talked about earlier, and again, for the sake of time, I only wish that this was longer. I mean, you touched on the what does happen when you come in into this country, and everyone forgets about that travel. That travel is not an easy travel if you're coming in illegally. You know,
Yes.
that, you know, what did you have to pay? What did you have to give up? What did you endure during that travel? You know, and one thing that we highlighted a little bit is, what if you do have family here and you do make it here, and then are you compromising their status because now you are a person, or they're a person of status and you're not? You know, saying, oh, are you harboring someone, and now that's all that mental trauma that you're factoring in. And one of the things that Dr. Cruz mentioned too is not truly not having enough representation in La Cultura Latina. Is, you know, sometimes we feel comfortable talking to our community and not having someone in that position to say, hey, can I speak to you? Can I trust you? You know, and say that what I'm gonna about to share with you doesn't take me into the deportation status and stuff. So I do appreciate you sharing that. And again, uh, I hate that we only had an hour here. That conversation was excellent. You know, um, now I know that we didn't collect, and my plan was to allow the audience to have questions. For the sake of time here, I want to allow both panelists to share their thoughts. We were able to get through 3 questions apiece. There were 2 questions that I wasn't able to ask. I'll email that to the panelists, get your feedback on it, and share that with the group. But I'll let Dr. Cruz, if you want to go first, and just give us a summary of how you felt the overall impact was, and what can you share with this community here to continue to help La Cultura Latina?
Okay. So final thoughts, right? So
Yes.
one thing, I have like a few key points that I had highlighted. I was like, I want to make sure I see a couple things, but I'll just take a minute or two. One of the biggest psychological issues I would say that there's, and is to build on something he just said a little bit ago is, in terms of an acute problem, and there's so much underdiagnosis, right? Because not only do people come, come here with all the like pre-trauma, during, trauma, and then when they get here and all the traumas there, but then also what was their baseline in their home country of how they were coping and what, so things that build upon themselves. And I think the other piece to note from a psychological perspective is that there are certain things we can say in Spanish that just never will sound the same in English. Never. And also you learn how to be in your language. So then when you're trying to talk to somebody who's more, even if they're Latin American, and they know some Spanish, that you can't express in your native language, like you can't express yourself, and that is how you know yourself. So it's just that part is really hard. The last point I want to make is like, how can we move forward? What can we do? What can an average American do? Latin American, any person living in the US. Number one is educate yourself more, like coming to things like this. I'm so glad there were so many people who showed up and are listening and asking great questions in the chat. And it doesn't have to just be mental health professionals, right? Everybody is a change agent. Number two, which is one of the biggest things, is when somebody else is saying something about like nonsense about a Latin person or somebody who's a minority, is challenge those remarks. Use your positionality, use your power and privilege to say, you know what? Not only does that is wrong, it also is very rude and it makes me feel uncomfortable. Now, you have to decide how you want to say that to who it is that did that, and if you want to take on that challenge. But that is one other way that we have a little bit of power. If you know that there's like nowadays, there's a lot more like, oh, we have all these immigrants that got to Miami. You're going to Nebraska. You're going to, so if you live in Nebraska or you live in Pennsylvania where it's not Philly and it's not Pittsburgh, but it's State College or wherever, then volunteer to do something, participate in a welcoming event, look up places like the Human Relations Commission. So there are ways that we can enact our power if we are kind of tired of something, and every little bit can help. So that I just want to, look up community leaders. There's a lot we can do. So just want to end with that point that potentially, we can work together and make things better a little bit at a time.
Thank you. And Dr. Hyman, your final thoughts?
Well, I'll make a comment what we can do, not easily, at the but should be aware of at least at the macro systemic level. At the macro systemic level, because I've been here many, many years, and there've been many, many groups of immigrants. These immigrants generally follow coup d'etats and regime changes led by the United States in growing and developing countries in South America and Central America. Chileans, after the assassination of Allende and the fall of the promising government of the time, who was here? Who came here? Okay, Chileans, and so on and so forth. Then Central America, governments establishing progressive governments from 54 in Guatemala, then in Nicaragua and other places. Contra wars, disasters in the country. Who was coming to the United States? So on and so forth. Ecuador. Ecuador was under what's his name? That president that was empowering the people, and so was the model of countries in South America. I remember I tell my family, I want to move there. Let's move there. It's so beautiful. Well, what happened? Coup d'etat. So now we have a lot of, or from that time on, we have a lot of Ecuadorians that are coming here. No surprise about coup d'etats in Haiti. And another coup d'etat in Haiti, and another one. So they're here. Venezuela, the same thing. They're here. So if we want to do something at a macro systemic level, pay attention to that. Pay attention to that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I want to thank, and again, for the sake of time here, we're down to the last 30 seconds. For everyone that's participating in the audience, if you have any questions, please enter them now into the chat features. I'm going to collect all the questions and shoot it out to our honors speakers here so they can provide you with feedback. Again, the recording will be provided to you at a later time, and it will be updated. It'll also be uploaded to the PHRC website. Again, thank you both to our speakers for giving their time and expertise in the field. And I hope that you guys join us again for part 2, because the conversation was great. I will allow for hopefully, let's go for another couple hours so we can go down those rabbit holes together. But again, appreciate you guys joining us. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
At that, I think that takes us right at the hour. Yep. Feel free to the individuals, you are able to log off at this time. But again, I welcome you guys to enter your questions if you have any questions into the chat feature. And I'll stay on here to the very end so I can collect the questions.